Good evening. You're listening to the Extreme Movie Show. Tonight's episode, Xtreme TV. Kolchak, Season 1, Episode 2, a.k.a. Mafia and Pimps. I'm your host, Rob, the host of the Extreme Movie Show. I have with me RDV and Professor Pixel. Gentlemen, we're talking about Kolchak, the TV show. Last week we did Episode 1. Very interesting episode. The two movies we also covered before on the Extreme Movie Show. And now we're delving into the template of everything afterwards that was awesome, such as the X-Files, Millennium, Fringe, you name it. All comes down to Kolchak being there. That being said, this episode, while dated, was mildly interesting, but I think the execution lacked a little bit of, I don't know what to call it, je ne sais quoi, as the French might say. But the ending was really, really good. And again, we say it about every movie of Kolchak and every episode so far, 2 of them in this season, that it's Darren McGavin as Kolchak that really, really carries it, and we're really watching it because it's an ensemble performance. Great episode. It's kind of goofy. Look, the occult was big in the 70s. Let's just get it all out there. So some of the stuff you watch now is definitely a little dated. You know, at this point already, you'd already had Man with a Golden Gun. You had Live and Let Die. You had big international flair like in James Bond movies, but you had the occult thing going on too. This one, episode 2, The Zombie, is about the Italian mafioso and whatever the African American, or as they say in the show, black, and they say some other stuff in here that I'm not going to say, in Southside Chicago. For you Wall Street bettors out there and millennials on Robinhood, this is basically how you did it old school. You ran numbers on the side with bets and you placed them with people on the street level and stuff. So it's about how the Italian mob's getting pissed at the black mob because their numbers are getting smaller because this dude keeps whacking them. But the black gang's basically saying, hey, the bro you said's killing everybody has been dead a couple of times. I mean, it's just so stupid. I'm sorry, it's just fun describing it. What did you guys think?
I didn't find it stupid at all. Honestly, in comparison to the last episode. In comparison to the last episode, the monster actually made sense to me. Yeah. Everything about it, in fact, its origin, how to defeat it, everything made sense. There were no questions left, which is how a show should answer things, especially one that's just week to week like this. It doesn't have a set order. It really is it's all compacted, and I understood the story just fine. And honestly, I like the execution of this one compared to the last one.
Okay, interesting. What about you, RDV?
I found it to be extremely boring.
Tell me why. Because,
like I said, it's a zombie, but it's not a real zombie. You said it's like, okay, my first thoughts watching is like, there's a guy goes in there, we get Mr. Willie Pike, who just scored the biggest cash load ever. Of an armored car, cash you'd never get to spend, and okay, what's going on? Because you don't know, we don't at this point we don't know it's a zombie. Like some guy goes in there, they're shooting him multiple times. I'm like, okay, what's going? Something's happening. These guys are just tearing apart. Then probably the best scenes here is probably with Kolchak. Whatever Kolchak interaction, either with the mob boss or with Charlie Aidman, who plays Winwood, Leo Winwood, basically the captain. Charles Aidman, if you recognize him, he's from Wild Wild West on there. He was on there for a while. Good guy. I noticed that too. Like a lot of this older show, because in the 70s, this is 1974, 75 when the show was going.
Yep.
You're getting people from the 50s and the 60s TV shows and stuff, movies.
Absolutely.
Here. So that's what's really cool about this series is that, hey, I'm learning about new actors that probably died in the 80s because they were in their 50s and 60s during the 70s.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting point because when we go back and review stuff in the Extreme Movie Show, even though we have a special channel here, Extreme TV, that we're doing TV shows on, it does kind of call back to where you go, wow, where do these people come from? For example, on our Twin Peaks Extreme TV review, we just dropped season 2 or episode 2 of season 1. The main guy that plays Truman, he was in Slapshot, which is considered by many to be one of the greatest sports films and definitely hockey films of all time. And dude's like in his mid-70s. And I'm like, oh, he was in some other movies that have some merit and note in the 70s and 80s that, you know, young people today would be like, I've never heard of that. It means nothing. And I'm like, wow, it brings new perspective to it. So let's kind of pivot back to what Pixel was saying about really enjoying it. Pixel, I didn't think this was poorly written per se. I think the biggest thing in the 60s and 70s that I've talked about before, and when we've done reviews of horror films, one of the themes I've mentioned before is that when you talk about classics, whether it's a vampire, werewolf, something supernatural, ghosts, those types of things, nothing beats Hammer films. Nothing beats maybe some European horror, people that have things that we're not used to seeing in the United States. Part of their culture is what it is, because the United States, relatively speaking, is a very young country still. That being said, going from the 60s and 70s with television being a medium that you can put a lot of hours of content on that didn't really exist too much before, I think it's a challenge to put and modernize horrific elements on screen and all that. And so I always talk about Rosemary's Baby doing that very successfully in a very contemporary setting. And one thing I will say about Kolchak that I definitely like about the show, cameras were a lot bigger physically back then. So this is film. And so for them to have the shots of them zooming in on some of the flyovers of Chicago wasn't always really huge and notable in all the shows back here in the early to mid 70s. And obviously the 70s, you know, the world wasn't small. You know, New York was still a huge city, Chicago, everywhere else around the world. But now we're starting to see this on our television screen back in the 70s. And it's kind of cool to kind of see that, wow, you know, it still has this neat look to it. And nothing beats watching like Chicago or Los Angeles or New York, you know, those three big cities, and seeing 70s TV shows, because they really capture, when you're watching the background where they filmed, or just how grimy and dirty it is. And despite me saying this was kind of an episode to me, part of it being dated is that people don't talk a little bit like they do now. And back then they had to watch what they said on TV. And yeah, you could sit there and say, well, the Italian mafia and the black mafia here are kind of stereotyped a little bit. That being said, they're real, they exist. Running numbers definitely does it. And if you've ever been involved in a betting pool at work or somewhere else like that, it's a similar thing, but it just goes a lot deeper into the gang stuff. But that only serves to just kind of, you know, have the story here of the occult being a part of it. So it's weird seeing Kolchak go to an occult store in the south side of Chicago before he gets picked up by the Pence.
I do want to point out though, but the episode wasn't really. It wasn't, to me. It was kind of boring, but it did have its key things, like I said, like and Pixel pointed out, you do get the origin of where this person was turned into a zombie and why you get. And what's great about each episode you watch in this series is Kolchak, his interactions with everybody. He's paying off the morgue guy. Hey, can see this? Or he's talking to the captain and telling the captain, he's like, hey, this is going on, and the captain's like, I'm going to throw you in jail if you don't get on my face. You know, it's like you're interfering, and it's the whole thing, and then Vincenzo every episode, because he's like, he has, I swear he's like the guy from 50 First Dates. He forgets every episode what happened in that previous episode. It's just so weird like that. But I like how he goes up to this episode, he's like yeah, Kolchak, I want you to do this. He's like, oh no, the last time I did this, I ended up in Sioux Falls, Indiana or whatever, and just doing whatever stuff.
Hardware convention.
Yeah, hardware convention. He's like, yeah. Well, it's like what your coworkers are. I'm not a coworker. Like I said, the guy said you mentioned me the coworker. I was the coworker. There was no co. It was just me working, and you're doing obituaries. So the small little interactions that Jerry McGavin has really makes up for this episode. But yes, you do get the lore, how the reason why the zombie is going around, how it was made and who's controlling it.
So there's something that you said earlier, and you said this wasn't a real zombie. I want to clarify, don't sleep on this kind of zombie, because this is as real as it gets. In cultural terms, the typical zombie is somebody who rises from the dead, just flesh. But that's not, in voodoo, they have their own kind of zombie that.
Yeah, that is a different kind. Yeah, it's not. Yeah, I do agree with you on that.
You can't sleep on this kind of monster, because it was really something brutal. Like this was a big man before he died.
Yeah.
Then just put that what's the word?
He's more like a puppet, a reanimated corpse. It's all they use for voodoo.
That's
That's what
voodoo.
it is. Yeah,
That
he's
is
not.
voodoo.
I would not call him really a zombie because zombie it's so been over saturated with the flesh eating monster stuff that. So I would call him more like, yeah, he's a reanimated
But it hadn't
corpse
been at that
puppet.
point.
Was
You
it?
have to remember this: the 70s. It hadn't been at that point. And plus, when it comes to like we said, voodoo, it is the term for it. It's the appropriate term. And so the monster in this episode was fantastic. That entire last scene of this episode where
what's very
Kolchak
well
is
acted.
and he's
He's
putting
in the graveyard of pimp mobiles, and he's got the salt, and he's got the hubcap with the
Well,
candles.
I want to correct him because there were zombie movies back in the 60s.
I didn't say there weren't any. It
Yeah.
wasn't oversaturated at that.
It was Night of the Living Dead, and from 1968, and then it started going into the 70s. He started getting into zombie movies and Dracula movies and all that stuff. Are still going strong. So, it's not like it's on TV like it is now, like Walking Dead and all these other stuff, on Netflix. Yeah, that's more now, but back
That's
then,
oversaturation.
that's beyond saturated.
At that
That's
point-
that's an ocean.
But it's still culturally the appropriate term for that kind of creature.
Even at that time, yes.
Yeah,
And
I think
even
that's,
now,
I think
you're
it's legit.
referring to
I
it
would
as
put here on Pixel's side for it. Again, bringing the occult to the mainstream, whether it's on the big screen or the television screen, was still relatively new in the 70s, and in a modern setting, which this definitely happened. So, yeah, the episode to me, kind of rounding things up and finishing up here, it's definitely worth watching as a Kolchak fan. Whether you think it's a little slow and boring like I do, the subplot of the female being his partner, I don't know if that got shoehorned in with the feminist push to be equal to males that started to happen in the 70s. You think of like the Dirty Harry movies and stuff. I found that a bit of a distraction because it didn't really add anything to the episode. It wasn't bad or anything, but it took away from what could have been, I thought, a bit more interesting show if they just focused on this voodoo zombie, as it were. And I will say that The Serpent and the Rainbow was a movie that came out in the late 80s with Bill Pullman in it. It's a Wes Craven film. Dealt with this exact same issue, and it was kind of terrifying, and it really modernizes what we're talking about here. Like you said, Pixel, hey, they did this monster kind of correctly, and I agree with you, and it's going to probably be hit or miss being a weekly TV show that we're supposed to suspend disbelief, but I think they did a fair job of trying to capture it for what it was. And again,
I just want to I want to touch on that. The whole with it was the editor, the person who basically runs the whole place, owns the paper. He wanted his either his daughter or his niece basically to work and to take her a job, and Vincenzo's like, yeah, no, she's kind of but Vincenzo he didn't really mind because he's like, I'm gonna irritate the crap out of Kolchak because he irritates me all the time. So he's like, and I noticed that in the episodes she was pretty thrown in there for like comic relief as being the annoying person. He's kind of like, I wonder what glue tastes like. That's her crazy, her personality like that. She's like, and you notice how he ducked, and got away from her. Like, he left her, drives away from her most times in these episodes. He does whatever he can, just because he works alone. So
yeah,
it's just another comic relief and then a hindrance for him, because basically this is something that probably happens in the real life. At basically all these places, like they have like the boss is like, well, I want my son to work here and get an education. Working. I want to learn the family business. And you're like, this guy's a complete idiot. I'm stuck working with him, and the veterans. So this happens. I'm sure it happens back, not as much today now, but back then it probably did more.
The show, it does have the show that I've seen in 2 episodes. Does have a little bit of element of bumbling cops, but also not just bad government or policies or whatever you want to call it, but there's also an office politics element to it, and that's where I'm saying this isn't necessarily so much a feminist episode as it definitely has that to it, which again is another irritant. And I like having that in there because even though it comes across as a comic element, the thing that ties it all together is that no matter what he does, he's unable to get pictures because he fell and broke his camera. So again, it's going to be that cynical thing where no matter what truth he ends up finding, he's not going to be able to share it with anybody, it seems like.
Yeah.
And that's a frustrating thing. But the best thing about this episode, when we say about it's McGavin's performance specifically, it's the voiceover work. I've been a sucker for voiceover. It really helps this episode out a lot. Final thoughts, guys.
Final thoughts. If you're a fan of The Big Bang Theory, Monique, the one that's assigned to Kolchak helper, she's the voice of the never seen Miss Wolitz in The Big Bang Theory. She's Harry's mom. So now, it's just where she first appeared on this show before doing some other stuff. It was just, I thought that was kind of a little neat little trivia for people to tie those two series together. But like I said, I'm a fan of both. Kolchak, this episode, even though I don't enjoy it as much as the other episodes, if you're a Kolchak fan, you're gonna watch this regardless because it's Kolchak. You get to see Darren McGavin. That's what we're here for. You can have a weak ass monster, but I'm there. His reaction and him just arguing with Vincenzo every single episode. It's just kind of like he's like a kid trying to duck out from responsibilities every single episode. That's what makes it so great. And just him fighting either with the police captains, him trying, the reason the cops are kind of bumbling idiots because they've never done with supernatural stuff. So of course, and then they're listening to their police captain who basically doesn't believe it. Oh, nonsense! There's a scientific explanation for this, which can be believable because most people do not believe in the supernatural, and so if something like this happens to you, I mean, like, what are you gonna do? Most people, their first gut is to hold on to rationality. So yeah, the cops are kind of like, that's also kind of a comic relief too. Like you see this, like you saw it in the movies, when they're shooting at the vampire like 30, 40 times, it's like, and like they couldn't stop them. You can even tell in the movie that some of the cops were starting like, they're kind of questions like, well, this is kind of pointless, but he's like, well, keep firing, because they're panicking too, because they can't stop this. So with the zombie here, it's just kind of the same thing. You see the mobsters, they're like, well, somebody killed this guy. I'm like, you can't kill him, he's already dead. But yeah, it said, if you're gonna watch this movie, make sure you have your chicken with you, a fresh chicken, and have some corn. And then
some rock salt.
so maybe some rock salt. And then make sure you stay away from the lady who has all the straw dolls.
Pixel, any final thoughts?
Well, it's chicken blood, but
well, you get a fresh chicken in for the blood.
No, I'm going to
tonight. Is chicken blood great for it?
That's corny.
The end really stuck with me. You're right. The voiceover each time is great, and whenever he's talking about that for the third time, Francois Edmonds is buried with rock salt poured in his mouth and his lips sewn shut, and the city officials will deny it. But you can see for yourself if you have the nerve.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Kolchak Season 1, Episode 2. Go watch it. Go check it out and let us know what you think. I'd like to thank RDV and Professor Pixel for joining me tonight. I'm your host, Rob, here on the Xtreme Movie Show, where we have 80s movies, action films, horror films, science fiction films. We have a collection of TV shows that we're reviewing, so from Season 1 Sundays, from Twin Peaks to Kolchak, which we're currently reviewing, to older ones that we've covered as well that we've really enjoyed. Check them out. Let us know what you think. And, of course, what you'd like us to cover in the future. Thanks for showing up, guys. Thanks, everybody, for listening. As always, have a good night and stay extreme. Good night, everybody.